My name is Bridget Cole. I'm 35. A marketing manager from Lincoln, Nebraska, living a life I built with my own two hands. The life I'm about to tell you unraveled in a single morning. It started during a tense strategy meeting. My phone buzzed against the polished conference table, a jarring interruption. I glanced down. A text from my sister glowed on the screen. Send me $2,800 for prom. I froze, my jaw locking tight. $2,800. For a dress. For one night. My fingers moved faster than my thoughts, typing a reply that felt like a reflex born of years of quiet resentment. Earn it yourself. I set the phone down, trying to refocus on the quarterly projections. But 3 minutes later, it buzzed again. This time, a group text from my parents. The words hit like a physical slap: pay for your sister's prom, or consider yourself out of this family. My heart hammered against my ribs. For years, I'd sent money for the mortgage, for emergencies, for what I believed were real needs. I thought I was the reliable one, the strong one. Now, they were drawing a line in the sand over a high school dance, and my place in the family was the bargaining chip. A hot wave of anger rose in my throat, but underneath it swirled something colder, sharper, the sickening realization that I had never been a daughter to them. I was a bank account. A safety net they now threatened to cut if I didn't fund a party. That whole evening, I paced my apartment, their words echoing on a loop. The ultimatum wasn't just about money. It was a revelation. By the time the sun went down, my decision was made. It was brutal in its simplicity. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I picked up my phone. My fingers didn't shake as I opened the banking app. I found the scheduled transfers, the automatic monthly lifeline I'd set up years ago to the joint account I shared with them. One by one, I selected them. Cancel. 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 By 8:30 the next morning, the direct deposits had stopped. The financial cord was cut. My life, as I knew it, was already upside down. And I was about to discover the truth behind their desperation, a truth that would steal the air from my lungs. To understand why that text was the final straw, you need to know the backdrop. My story isn't one of privilege. I built everything from the ground up. My parents, however, built a fantasy. Their world revolved entirely around my younger sister, their golden child. I was 17 when she was born, and I watched the family dynamic shift instantly. I worked after-school jobs while they catered to her every whim. They lived in a fragile bubble of designer clothes for her, lavish parties, and weekend trips, all while their suburban house in Lincoln crumbled around them, a money pit they refused to acknowledge. I took a different path. 2 jobs through college, my first real marketing gig at 25, and by 30, I was running campaigns and paying my own way. My independence, I learned too late, was what they valued most about me, not my resilience, but my resources. For years ago, wanting to help, I opened a joint bank account for family essentials, groceries, utilities, the practical stuff. I transferred money faithfully, too busy with my own career to scrutinize the statements. I trusted them. My sister was raised on a diet of pure entitlement. By 18, her tastes were ruthlessly expensive: $500 dresses, $200 spa days, all funded by our parents' draining savings. I was the perpetual outsider, the one who had to earn every scrap of approval, while she was forgiven everything. "She's just young," my mom would say with a dismissive wave. My dad would just nod along. That joint account was my greatest act of trust and my most profound error. Looking back, the red flags were there: my sister's constant new accessories, my mother's vague murmurs about unexpected bills. I was the family fixer, the responsible one. But the moment I finally said no, I saw their true faces. They didn't see a daughter refusing a demand. They saw an ATM declining a transaction. And they decided to shut me down. The blueprint of our family was drawn in double standards. Growing up, my mother's refrain was a cold, sharp command: "Figure it out yourself, Bridget." No discussion, no help. But for my sister, the rules vanished. I can still picture her 10th birthday, a $2,000 fantasy, a princess-themed spectacle complete with a rented carriage. That same weekend, I was stocking shelves at the local grocery, my earnings earmarked for college textbooks. The disparity wasn't just noticed, it was a lesson. Once, my father, usually a man of few words, summed it up without meaning to. Watching my sister get fawned over, he said quietly, "She's our second chance to get it right." The words didn't just sting, they etched a permanent line, dividing her from me. As she grew, so did her appetites. The latest smartphone, front-row concert tickets, impulsive shopping sprees, her desires were met with a blank check, even as my parents' own finances dipped into the red. When I opened that joint family account, I told myself I was throwing them a lifeline for groceries and light bills. In truth, I was paying for my own willful blindness. I was funding the very system that had always placed her on a pedestal and me in the role of silent supporter. I had built a life, brick by brick, without asking for a thing. My sister had never lifted a finger. Our parents had engineered a world where everything came easy for her at any cost. And now, the unspoken expectation had finally been voiced. It was my turn to fund the fantasy. The dam broke on a hectic Tuesday. My phone, set to silent, began lighting up with a frantic, persistent buzz. The screen showed a text from my sister, not a request, but a decree. "I need $2,800 for prom. Send it now." A raw, immediate anger heated my blood. $2,800. For a single night. For a dress destined for the back of a closet. My reply was typed with fingers that trembled not from uncertainty, but from long-suppressed fury. No way. Get a job and earn it yourself. I expected a dramatic text back. Instead, my phone rang instantly. Her voice was a shrill weapon, dripping with an entitlement so complete it took my breath away. "You're so selfish, Bridget. It's just prom. Why can't you help?" I gripped the phone, my knuckles white, forcing a calm I didn't feel into my voice. "You're 18. Plenty of kids work to pay for their own prom. Try it." She scoffed, a nasty, dismissive sound. The venom in her next words was pure and undiluted. "You don't understand anything. I deserve this." The line went dead. Deserve. The word echoed in the silent space of my office, twisting in my gut. Since when was my money something she deserved? I tried to bury myself in work, but her voice played on a loop. It was the soundtrack to every childhood slight. It was 16-year-old me, humiliated, begging for $50 for a class trip, only to be met with my mother's flat, "We can't afford it." It was the memory of my sister, weeks later, casually waving $200 concert tickets our parents had somehow afforded. The injustice wasn't a fresh wound, it was a chronic ache, flaring up with vicious intensity. Just before noon, a voicemail popped up, seemingly sent by mistake. My sister's voice, now a performative sob, filled my ear. "Mom, Dad, Bridget is being impossible again. Make her pay." I could see it perfectly. Her in their living room, orchestrating another crisis, where she was the star victim. The parental response was swift and surgical. First, my mother's text, a blade disguised as words, "Pay for your sister's prom, or you can no longer consider yourself part of this family." Then, my father's, colder and simpler, a moral guilt trip in one line, "Do the right thing, Bridget." My hands shook as I held the phone. Do the right thing. I had done the right thing for years. $1,000 for the mortgage. $2,000 for an emergency roof repair. Countless transfers to keep the lights on and the fridge full. My reward for a lifetime of responsibility was an ultimatum: pay for a party or lose your family. In that moment, the last fragile thread of obligation snapped. This wasn't about prom. This was the final, blatant confirmation of my role. And I was done playing my part. A cold, hard knot of anger and betrayal settled deep in my chest. This was about more than a dance. Something was fundamentally wrong. The feeling was a physical hum in my veins, a warning system I'd ignored for too long finally screaming to life. I called my sister back, a last, desperate attempt to puncture the bizarre bubble of entitlement. "Why is this such a life-or-death issue?" I asked, straining to keep my voice level. "Ask Mom and Dad," she snapped, her tone dismissive. "They said you'd pay. It's my right. My right." The absurdity of it almost choked me. "You have no right to a single dollar of mine," I said, my patience shattering. "It's time you grew up." "You're ruining everything," she shrieked, and the line went dead again. Alone in my office, my heart thudded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The ghosts of 100 conversations swirled around me. My mother's hurried, scripted pleas. "We're barely making ends meet, Bridget." My father's rare, guilt-inducing calls that always ended with the same quiet ask, "Can you help us out this month?" I had been the reliable one, the solver. Too busy building my own life to scrutinize the details of theirs. Too trusting to hear the hollow notes in their stories. By mid-afternoon, I was a caged animal pacing my office, the outside world of emails and deadlines a distant blur. My sister's boldness wasn't new, but this felt coordinated, like the opening move in a planned campaign. Driven by a gut-deep suspicion, I opened my banking app and navigated to the history of transfers to the family account. The record of my loyalty scrolled by: $1,000, $1,500, $800, a relentless stream over years. Each one accompanied by my mother's echoed justifications. The transmission went, "It's just a tough patch." I had believed I was a lifeline. Now, their ultimatum made those past pleas sound like rehearsed lines from a very long con. I sent 2 blunt texts. To my mother, "Is a prom dress really worth disowning your daughter over?" To my father, "I need an explanation now." The silence that followed was louder than any reply. It was an answer in itself. I slumped in my chair, the phone a heavy weight in my hand. The clarity was brutal. This wasn't a request for help. It was coercion. They were wielding the word family not as a bond, but as a blunt instrument. My mind zeroed in on the joint account, the very heart of my so-called help. I hadn't logged into it in years, granting them a trust they were now weaponizing. My sister's tantrum and my parents' nuclear threat weren't about fabric and a corsage. They were a smokescreen for something much bigger. And I was done being a passive player in their game. The proof landed in my inbox later that evening. A bank email with a stark subject line: "Urgent, large transaction notification." A chill ran through me. I opened it. The details were stark. A $5,000 transfer had been initiated from the joint family account that morning. I had not authorized it. My breath hitched as I stared at the number. $5,000. Gone. Their threats, their desperation over prom money, it all snapped into a terrifying, logical focus. This was no coincidence. The $5,000 was a clue, and the prom demand was the alarm bell. Something was very, very wrong, and the trail led directly back to the account I had funded with nothing but good intentions. I called my sister immediately, the $5,000 figure burning a hole in my thoughts. "What is happening with the family account?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice neutral. Her response was instant irritation. "I don't know, ask Mom and Dad. Why are you always so suspicious?" $5,000 is just gone, I pressed, my control slipping. "Do you know anything about it?" A short, cold laugh crackled through the phone. "You're exaggerating. It's probably nothing." The line went dead. I sat motionless, anger simmering into a hard, cold rage. Her dismissal wasn't just evasion, it was confirmation. She knew something. They all did. Sitting back was not an option. The family well had been poisoned, and I knew I'd find no truth there. I needed an ally who operated on evidence, not emotion. I texted my friend Ellen Worth, a razor-sharp lawyer whose office was 3 floors down from mine. "Need to talk. Urgently." Her reply was characteristically swift: "Come up after 6. Doors open." By 6:30 p.m., I was in the quiet, book-lined sanctuary of Ellen's office. The desk was a landscape of legal briefs, a world of order amidst my chaos. I laid it all out: the prom ultimatum, the mysterious $5,000 transfer, the decades of context that made it all feel like a collapsing house of cards. "Something is very wrong with that account," I said, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. "I need to see what they've actually been doing." Ellen listened, her expression unreadable but focused. "Then let's look," she said simply, opening her laptop. With my login credentials, her fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating past the surface balance into the raw history. Within minutes, a stark ledger of betrayal filled the screen. Ellen's brow furrowed. "There are numerous large withdrawals here," she noted, her voice clinical. substantial payments to various creditors, and a significant number to retail accounts. A cold dread tightened my stomach. Retail accounts? What kind of retail? Ellen scrolled, her eyes scanning the data. Her professional composure didn't waver, but her gaze turned wary. High-end boutiques, jewelry stores, luxury brand websites, a travel agency. She listed them off like a prosecutor reading an indictment. My mind reeled. This wasn't for groceries or gas. This was the financial footprint of a life I didn't live. Ellen navigated to a different view, her analysis quick and precise. The pattern here suggests your parents were using these funds to service significant debt, she stated. Credit card companies, a car loan, and it looks like payments on a second mortgage. The words second mortgage hit me like a physical blow. Betrayal was too simple a term. They had constructed an entire secret life of debt, and I had been their unwitting underwriter. Every call for help with an unexpected expense echoed in my memory, now exposed as a calculated lie to maintain a facade. Then Ellen highlighted another series of transactions. These are smaller, but they're recurring, she said, pointing. Designer clothing retailers, upscale restaurants, and this one here, a payment to couture prom planning and events. Prom planner. The phrase made my sister's $2,800 demand snap into horrifying focus. It wasn't a desperate ask, it was a line item in an established budget. My budget. They were using my money, I whispered, the full, ugly truth dawning, to pay their own debts and to fund her lifestyle. Ellen gave a single, sober nod. It appears that way. Your money wasn't for emergencies. It was subsidizing their financial choices and your sister's luxury. I sank back into the chair, the air leaving my lungs. The foundation of my family, the trust, the supposed mutual support, wasn't just cracked. It had been a deliberate illusion, and I had paid for every brick of it. The walk from Ellen's office felt like moving through deep water. The weight wasn't just emotional. It was the heavy, cold certainty of systematic betrayal. This was a calculated, long-term deception, not a spontaneous lapse. I needed the full, unassailable proof, not just for them, but for myself, to cement the reality and kill any lingering doubt. The following day, I returned to Ellen's office. The space was lit by a single desk lamp, casting long shadows over towers of folders. Ellen's focus, however, was a beacon of sharp, uncompromising clarity. Without preamble, she slid a thick stack of printed documents toward me. Her expression was solemn, a lawyer delivering a devastating verdict. The comprehensive bank reports, she said, her voice low. Brace yourself. I opened the first page. The summary was a brutal, numerical sucker punch. Over 4 years, $100,000 had flowed out of the joint account I had opened in good faith. My money. 100,000 reasons why their prom ultimatum was not just cruel, but grotesquely hypocritical. A sharp, clean pain, the kind that comes from a truth too ugly to deny, lanced through me. I hadn't been a daughter helping out. I had been a revenue stream they were quietly milking dry. Ellen guided me through the forensic details. Her finger traced lines on the transaction logs. Dozens of large, recurring transfers, she narrated, her tone detached and factual. Substantial payments to multiple credit card companies, consistent withdrawals for a car loan, and these here, she said, tapping a column of figures, are for a second mortgage. My mouth went desert dry. A second mortgage. Their proud boasts about the house being almost paid off echoed in my head, now exposed as a foundational lie. The very stability they pretended to have was mortgaged, literally, and I was paying the note. Then, Ellen turned to another section. And these are the lifestyle expenses, she continued, her pen circling a different set of entries. Regular disbursements to high-end boutiques, jewelers, a travel agency that booked your sister's spring break trip. And this, she said, circling a line item with finality, is a $3,000 deposit to couture prom planning and events. The number glared from the page. My sister's demand for $2,800 wasn't an outrageous guess, it was a budget shortfall. She was merely submitting a requisition to what she saw as her personal family fund. She had been raised to view my earnings as an extension of her entitlement. I leaned back, the room tilting slightly. A montage of my mother's pleading calls played behind my eyes, each one a scene from a play where I was the mark. Every transfer I'd made with a sense of duty had, in reality, been a subsidy for their lies and her luxury. How could they do this? The question escaped as a whisper, directed at the universe more than at Ellen. She met my gaze, her own filled with a weary understanding. People construct entire narratives to justify taking what isn't theirs, especially from family. Desperation doesn't always look panicked. Sometimes it looks entitled. Her words landed with a terrible finality. The time for questions was over. The time for action was now. The next morning, Wednesday, I made the call. Speaking to the bank representative, my voice was unnaturally calm. I instructed them to close the joint account immediately and freeze all activity. The entire process took less than 10 minutes. Each confirmation click felt like the metallic snap of a lock opening, of chains falling away. I was severing the financial umbilical cord that had been feeding a parasite. Then I composed the email. It contained no arguments, no emotions, just a simple, cold statement of fact and consequence. The joint account is closed. I am aware of the $100,000. You will not receive another cent. I hovered my finger over the send key for only a second. There was no hesitation, only the heavy, somber certainty of a necessary ending. I pressed it. My hands were steady. My breath was even. But in the center of my chest sat a dense, cold lump, the solidified remains of a trust that was not just broken, but obliterated. This was no longer about money. It was about the annihilation of a fundamental bond and the beginning of a very different kind of accounting. The backlash was instantaneous and volcanic. My phone erupted in a cacophony of rings and vibrations, a digital siege. My sister's call came first, her voice a tremulous mix of fury and raw panic. You can't do this. We need that account. I maintained a cold calm, though my heart drummed against my ribs. Need it for what exactly? I asked, my tone flat. To fund another shopping spree? She sputtered, incoherent with outrage for a moment, before her words crystallized into a shrill accusation. You're destroying this family. The line went dead with a final, dramatic click. Next was the text assault. My mother's message was a sprawling, defensive wall of words. How dare you accuse us after all we've done? That money was for survival. The word survive seemed to pulse on the screen, a sick joke alongside the evidence of luxury hotels and prom planners. My father's followed, shorter but dripping with wounded authority. Bridget, think about the damage you're causing. I didn't engage. Their words were empty shells, the last, frantic scripts of a play that had closed. I called Ellen, my anchor in the storm. They're in full panic mode, I reported, my own voice unsteady from the aftershock. Naturally, Ellen replied, her tone dry. You didn't just close an account. You revoked their license to your life. You did the right thing. Her certainty was a lifeline, yet part of me drowned in doubt. The freedom was exhilarating, but it was born from a loss so profound it felt like a death. The family I'd fought to belong to was a fiction. Their lies had rewritten our entire history, and I stood alone in the bleak, new reality. A week later, I drove to their home in the Lincoln suburbs. My grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled. A fat folder of financial autopsy reports sat beside me. I had pored over them for days. $100,000 of my money, siphoned over 4 years. Their total, hidden debt, $500,000. This wasn't a conversation. It was a confrontation with the evidence. The atmosphere in their living room was thick enough to choke on. My mother was a rigid statue on the sofa, her eyes narrowed into slits. My father stood sentinel by the window, arms locked across his chest, his expression granite. My sister was an artful display of detachment, slouched in an armchair, her face illuminated by her phone's glow, refusing to acknowledge my entrance. I didn't sit. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to state facts, I began, dropping the folder onto the coffee table with a decisive thud. The account I opened to help with essentials. You withdrew $100,000 from it. Meanwhile, you buried yourselves under $500,000 in debt. I spread the documents like a prosecutor, the statements, the transaction logs, the undeniable map of deception, credit card companies, auto lenders, the clandestine second mortgage. And finally, the damning trail of luxury: boutique charges, jewelry receipts, travel itineraries for my sister. My mother's face contorted, but not with remorse. It was pure, outraged defiance. "How dare you invade our privacy like this?" she shrieked, her voice vibrating with wounded fury. "We are family." Family. The word, weaponized for the last time, finally broke something open in me. A tidal wave of fury, clean and scorching, rose from my core. I had given them everything: my labor, my trust, my money, and I had been nothing but a resource to mine. "You lied," I stated, my voice dangerously level despite the inferno inside. "You told me it was for survival, for bills, to keep the lights on. But it was a subsidy. For her life." I turned my gaze to my sister, a silent, entitled monument in the chair. "For her luxury." My father took a single, aggressive step forward, his voice shedding its usual passivity for a hard, defensive edge. "You don't understand the pressure, Bridget. We had no other choice. The debts were suffocating us. You were supposed to help." I stared at him, the phrase "supposed to" echoing with a staggering entitlement. "I did help," I replied, my own voice thin with disbelief. "I sent you thousands, year after year. And you chose to spend it on a lifestyle you couldn't afford." My mother interjected, her anger now morphing into performative tears. "You're being so selfish. Can't you see? We did it all for her, for your sister's future." I turned my eyes to my sister, a silent plea for some shred of humanity, a flicker of shame, a muttered "sorry, anything." But she offered only a blank, impassive mask. She was a spectator in her own drama, letting our parents wage war on her behalf. That silence was more damning than any tantrum. It confirmed she wasn't a spoiled child. She was a co-conspirator who believed the world, and my bank account, existed for her benefit. My father's volume surged, his face flushing. "You can't just walk away from your responsibility," he boomed, his finger jabbing toward me. "We're your family. You owe us. You owe her." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it seared my throat. "I owe you nothing," I said, the words cracking with a final, painful release. "The account is closed. The money is gone. You will deal with the consequences of your own choices." My mother let out a sharp, theatrical gasp, her hand flying to her chest as if I'd physically wounded her. "You're abandoning us?" she wailed. My sister's head finally snapped up. For a fleeting second, raw panic flashed in her eyes, the terror of a golden child seeing her gilded cage dismantled. But her lips remained sealed. No defense, no plea, nothing. I held the gaze of each of them, this triad of takers. "You abandoned me first," I stated, my voice quiet but carrying in the charged air. "You abandoned me the first time you valued her whim over my need, the first time you traded my trust for cash. You've been leaving me for years." The room then exploded into a chaos of wounded noise. My mother's screams about ingratitude and loyalty. My father's roared accusations of betrayal. Through it all, my sister sat like a stone, detached and unmoved. The symphony of their outrage was the final proof I needed. My hands trembled, not with weakness, but with the adrenaline of severance, as I gathered my documents. "I'm done," I announced, cutting through the din. I turned and walked toward the front door. Their voices, a desperate, raging chorus, followed me, but I didn't hesitate, didn't look back. I had offered them the chance to face the truth. They chose to attack the messenger. Their power was broken. Back in the silence of my own home, I executed the final, digital severance. The joint account was closed, but the lines of communication were still open wounds. With a steady hand, I took my phone. I blocked my parents' numbers, one after the other, redirecting their emails to a spam abyss. Then I blocked my sister's number. Each tap, each confirmation, was a deliberate snip of a cord that had bound me to them, a cord they had used as a leash and a lifeline. There was a sharp, grieving pain in the action, but rising beneath it was a profound, spreading calm. The silence that followed was not empty. It was mine. I was no longer their wallet. I was finally wholly myself. Months unfolded in quiet succession. News of the inevitable reached me through the distant, neutral channel of a cousin. My parents had filed for bankruptcy. The $500,000 mountain of debt, the credit lines, the personal loans, the devastating second mortgage had finally avalanched, burying the fragile fantasy they'd built. Their house in the Lincoln suburbs, the one they'd always claimed was almost paid off, was lost. I allowed myself a single, vivid mental image: movers hauling out the furniture, my mother weeping amidst the empty rooms, my father staring blankly at a wall, seeing the hollow sum of his choices. A fragment of my heart, the part trained for a lifetime to feel responsible, ached for their downfall. But a larger, quieter part felt a profound nothingness. They were architects of their own ruin. My money hadn't been a rescue, it was merely a delay, funding the final, more extravagant acts of their play until the curtain fell. My sister encountered her own, necessary earth. Without our parents' buckling financial shield, reality arrived unsoftened. According to my cousin, she was working part-time at a mid-tier clothing store, tasked with folding shirts and operating a cash register. I imagined her there, ringing up purchases for girls like her former self, finally earning the dollars she had once so casually demanded from me. The girl who believed a $2,800 dress was a birthright was learning the actual weight of a dollar. I felt no gloating satisfaction, only a quiet, bittersweet relief. Perhaps, through the mundane discipline of work, she might one day grasp the lesson I could never teach with words. As for me, I cultivated peace. The silent phone was no longer a source of anxiety, but a sanctuary. The constant background hum of guilt and obligation ceased. I poured my energy into my career, fortified my savings, and began the careful work of rebuilding a self that existed outside of their narrative. I started therapy, patiently unpacking the toolbox of manipulation I'd been handed as a child and learning to use new tools: boundaries, self-worth, discernment. Letting go of the hope for their change was the hardest part. It was a mourning. I had to bury the fantasy that they would ever see me as anything more than a utility. But from that fertile ground of acceptance, my own freedom grew. I learned the liberating power of no. I protected my peace, my future, my finances with a vigilance born of hard-earned wisdom. Their chaos was no longer my inheritance. This journey taught me the core truth: family is not a binding contract written in guilt and obligation. Love is not a currency to be extracted until the account is empty. For years, I believed carrying their burdens was my duty, that their failing stability was my cross to bear. I was mistaken. True salvation lies in the courage to draw a line, in the fierce control of your own resources, and in the strength to walk away from toxic systems, even when they share your last name. If you are reading this, feeling the familiar, weary weight of similar expectations, please hear this. You do not owe anyone your mental security, your financial stability, or your peace. Protecting yourself is not an act of selfishness. It is the fundamental, non-negotiable act of survival. Thank you for walking this difficult path with me. Sharing this story has been a crucial stitch in my own healing. I know many of you have your own stories. Have you ever faced the painful task of setting boundaries with family? What did you learn? Please share in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation. If my experience resonated with you, consider subscribing. There are more real, raw stories to come. Your support and solidarity mean more than you know.